I'm standing in the well-lit room. In front of me, there are 20 well-dressed and clearly anxious people. I provide them with instructions. Okay, everybody, so what I want you to do now is I want you to line up in front of me, starting on this end and going all the way through. And I want you to line up based on the questions that I ask you. Question number 1, where do you live in the city? Line up east to west. Pretty easy. Question number 2 gets a little bit harder. Is the world getting better or is the world getting worse? I'm nervous. I'm also really excited. This is the first major decision I'm making in my new job. This is my new job, which is giving me an incredible sense of purpose. I'm that cheesy guy since I was a little kid at a convenience store of my family saying, I want to change the world. Well, finally, I found the job that gave it to me. And in this moment, I was about to make a major decision. I asked them a third question. Is the revitalization of Regent Park a good thing or a bad thing? I tell the people, good is on this side and bad is on this side. I watch as 19 people clamor to the good side. I'm interviewing them for a job for the manager of our Regent Park location, so it makes sense. The safe bet is to go to the good side. But I watch as one woman goes to the other side. I hadn't noticed her before, but immediately her courage strikes me as interesting. So I ask her, why are you standing there? And she says, it's not that I think the revitalization is a bad thing, but if it doesn't serve the people it's intending to serve, then it would just become a gentrification, and that's a bad thing. Her answer is compelling, and I want to invite her back to a second round interview. There's 5 of them that we invite back, and we do the interviews this time one-on-one. I'm doing it in partnership with my CEO. In fact, one of the people in the interview process really stands out, and I'm pretty sure he's the guy. He's charismatic, he's experienced, he knows what he's talking about. For me, he's the safe bet in this risky decision. I'm so certain of this that by the time that she comes, her being the last interview, I turn to my CEO and I say, I'm pretty sure this is just a formality at this point. She sits down in front of us, we make small talk, and I ask the same question of her that I ask everybody else. Why do you want this job? She looks me in the eyes and she says, because I want to change the world. I feel inspired. I look over to my CEO to nod approval, and I should tell you she was having a bit of a long and hard day, so I think so taken by that moment, she started crying. I feel incredibly awkward and unsure what to do, so I look back at the candidate, who then starts crying too. Now, I've done a lot of interviews before, but no one prepares you for the moment where everyone in the room starts crying. I didn't know what to do. I'm not sure what I said next, but I did know in that moment that this was the person that we had to hire for the job. Later that week, we offered the job of the Regent Park manager to Shelby Kim. Shelby and I started immediately working together at our location. We worked for an organization called the Center for Social Innovation. And we had been in Regent Park for the last year trying to figure out how we could apply our work and our approach to community animation and social innovation to this neighborhood that's in transition. To be really frank, CSI did not come out of the gates very strong. Our first year was a little bit of a disaster. And that's one of the reasons why, a year in, I was in this position hiring Shelby. When we started working together, we hit the ground running on making the right relationships in the neighborhood. We were doing everything right and working together in perfect concert with one another. I felt confident as heck that I had picked the right person for the job. And then something really interesting happened at about the 3-month mark. A colleague of ours had a birthday party. There was karaoke, and then there was dance cave. And I could tell by the laughter, some of you are well aware of the legend that is Dance Cave. My way of describing it would be sweaty. So we were at Dance Cave, and I'm feeling alive. The type of alive you feel when like Aretha Franklin Respect comes on, and you just belt it out and you high five, and you misspell the words occasionally because you're so excited. And it's awesome. And we're standing in this circle, all dancing, and I turn my head, and we lock eyes. And everything else in the room went out of focus. What must have been 2 seconds felt like 2 minutes. I felt sparks going up and down my legs and through my heart and out of my mouth. I think most of us know this feeling, that moment on the dance floor when you connect with someone, you're like, what is happening right now? That moment. I didn't know what to make of it, and of course, immediately I was struck with guilt and anxiety. This is someone who I work with. This is someone who I'm their boss. I can't feel this way. Feeling that I should at least address what happened, the next day I called her. I said, so about what happened on the dance floor? She acknowledged that she had felt the moment as well, and we just as quickly started talking about why this could never happen. Work, professionalism, integrity, all of the right reasons. So then I said, absolutely. And you know what? I know we're going to continue to change the world together. And if it's something, in the future changes and we're in different positions, maybe something might happen. And then she said to me, Dil, I agree with everything you said, but I feel like you left the door open just a little bit. And I need to close it. She was right. And truthfully, I felt pretty embarrassed about the moment. I felt like here I'm supposed to be the more mature one, the professional one. I should have been the one to have said, to not have opened the door in the slightest way. The good news is the rejection stuck hard. And I was able to get over that moment pretty quickly, and she and I were able to get back to work. For those of you who know the Regent Park neighborhood, it is going through a massive revitalization. And there is an incredible risk of gentrification as new people move in. The Center for Social Innovation and our work there is trying to be part of the solution and not the problem, which is hard because, frankly, we are a West End organization coming in with our own set of solutions. But we spent a lot of time over that next year listening to people and coming up with new ways to connect people in the neighborhood. One of my favorites was the Regent Park Community Potluck, which we conceived and got funded and started working on planning. Shobi and I also went normal in all other facets of work. We did management training together, there was a retreat, everything was as normal as you could imagine it could be. It's funny, actually, when we did the management training, the coach that we had did these personality profiles in all of us. And he gave it to all of us, and he gave us everyone else's, and he said, I want you to study the different people you work with, which I thought was a really neat exercise. And I went through all the different profiles of people. When I got to hers, I started making notes on each page. In my head, I thought to myself, damn, I'm a good manager. There was a little bit more happening there. In fact, a year after that moment on the dance floor, I was traveling back home in Tanzania, and I was with my sisters. And on that trip, I picked up a book called The Alchemist. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, the book is largely about finding your purpose. In the book, they refer to it as your personal legend. And there's a line in the book that stuck with me over and over and over again. The line went something like this: when you want something enough, the universe will conspire with you to make it happen. Every time I read that line, I saw her face. And every time I saw her face, I spiraled into different emotions of panic, excitement, anxiety, and love. I didn't know what to make of it, but I knew something had to give. I came back to Toronto shortly after, and I made a pact to myself. I said, you know what, I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to write a note on my Evernote to just get out my feelings, as if I was telling her how I felt, and that would put it at rest. That would be my therapy. A few weeks later, upon my return, a friend of ours hosted another storytelling event in the city called Stories of Ours, out in Regent Park. And Shil was telling a story that night. Her story was about her upbringing, her being an immigrant, and it was all set in this convenience store that her family had. I knew a lot about her by that point, but I didn't know that we shared that in our past. And I felt that feeling of explosions going up and down my leg again, that like, oh my God, this explains a lot. The shared experience, the shared values. When we wrapped up the evening, we cleaned up, we got out onto Dundas Street, and we started walking towards Parliament. She was going north and I was supposed to go west. As we left the building, I turned to her and I said, Davenport Milk Mart. And then she said, well, what's that? And I said, the name of the convenience store that my family had. And we laughed and we talked about our shared experience and we talked about different and similar stories that we had. And I'm not sure what triggered it, but then she turned to me and she said, have you ever read The Alchemist? I don't know if I actually looked like a deer in a headlight, but I felt like a deer in some sort of headlight, and they were high beams. And I'm pretty sure I stammered out, yes? Why? And she said to me, there's a line in the book about how when you want something enough, the universe conspires with you to make it happen. I slowly went into my pocket to take out my phone to pull up my note on Evernote. But right as that happened, the bus came, and I realized that the moment was lost. We hugged, we said goodbye, and she went away. I walked towards the streetcar, and it was a weird moment where my head was low because I felt like I had kind of chickened out. But I was also kind of skipping because I was like, whoa, that was a moment. I don't even know what to make of that. And so it was this weird kind of juxtaposition of emotions that I was feeling. And so weeks later, I was talking with my CEO, who's a good friend, and I told her about the evening, and she had known the backstory. I'd always tried to be open about just even the feelings. And, you know, she said to me, she said, Dil, love conquers all. We can figure out the work stuff. You've been clearly tormented about this. You should tell her. So I picked up the phone and I texted her and I said, hey, do you want to have a courageous conversation tonight? It's as cheesy as it sounds. See, and just for context, when we did this management training where I did the notes on our profiles, when we did those, our instructor taught us about this idea of courageous conversations. Where if you're managing someone, you know, sometimes you have to have them. They're conversations you don't really want to have with people, but you need to have. So I knew that would get her hooked to have a conversation with me. So we meet up that night, and we meet up and we sit down and we exchange small talk. And she said, Adil, what about that courageous conversation you wanted to have? And I pull out my phone again, and the Evernote app, and I read her what it says. And it describes my feelings. It describes all of the moments where the universe sent me signals. And it says something to the effect at the end, which was, I'm not sure how you feel, but I know that we will, regardless, make the world a better place. And I just think we can do it better together. I very shyly put the phone down, looked at her, and then she burst out laughing. And I was like, what's up? And she said, Dil, like, when you said you wanted to have a courageous conversation, I thought I was in trouble with work. I thought this was a work-related conversation. And I said, right, okay, I could see how you got that impression. But what do you think about what I just read? And she said, she used words like attracted and excited and nervous and unsure. And so we talked more about it. We talked a lot about the work and love stuff. It's very interesting, right? Like, we all want, as human beings, we all desire love. It's the most compelling and strong emotion. And we all work more than anything else that we do, and yet we're asked to separate these two things because when they're combined, it's deemed too complex. But we talked about, wouldn't it be interesting if you combine the things? Maybe in addition to complexity, you can actually co-create in ways that you never imagined. What if love was in our workplace? Of course, we were convincing ourselves of the possibility of something. But we still felt unsure. And so we resolved to think about it and to not do anything and to not act. About a month later was our first Regent Park Community Potluck. Now, I haven't told you why I'm so excited about this, so I'll mention this now. As a neighborhood in transition, in order to ensure that gentrification does not happen, there is an extreme imperativeness around building social cohesion. Social cohesion is one of those things that sounds really good, but it's kind of invisible. You're not really sure. It's not like there's a playbook that you can break out and say, all right, build this stuff. But the potluck was our answer to this in a very small but meaningful way. Your ticket was your food, and you would show up no matter who you were, what you looked like, what your economic status was like, and you would show up with your food, and you would sit at a table with someone who's quite different than you, probably, and you would connect. And so the potluck was one of these big things that we had created, and a month after that courageous conversation was the first one. The room was buzzing. There was people flying in every direction. There was flowers being put on tables. I was so excited. I mean, I love creating experiences for people, and this was one of the biggest ones I had been able to create. Right before it happened, Shelby and I went off to the side. We needed to talk about our facilitation for the evening. Except when we sat down, we looked at each other, and I said, "How are you feeling?" And she looked back at me, but she didn't say anything. And I got taken back to that moment on the dance floor where everything in the room went out of focus. And what felt, again, like 2 minutes was probably 2 seconds. But we both started tearing up and communicated entirely with our eyes. And I nodded my head to her, and she said, "I know, Dale." We wiped our tears away, we got up, and we hosted our first potluck. It was a massive success, so much so that we've now done 7 more. And not just in our space at CSI, many other people in the neighborhood have been picking up on the plan, and Regent Park is hopefully becoming a community of potlucks, where regardless of where you are, you can eat together. Regent Park as a neighborhood is increasingly becoming a model for social cohesion and inclusion. And recently, in the last month, New York Times wrote a piece about it, a massive change in perception, if you're familiar with the stories that were being told of that neighborhood for most of the last 50 years. So stuff is working there. And as for Shil and I, well, we continue to change the world together at work and outside of it. Thank you.
Adil Dhala!